Okay, hello, welcome to the seventh lesson of our chess course. Before you start with the king and queen checkmate, you should make sure that you fully understood how to do the king and two rooks checkmate. You should also try and see that you've practiced it at least, let's say, 5 to 10 times before moving on to this lesson. Now we're going to be looking at the king and queen checkmate. It's a little bit easy, but not as easy as the king and two rooks checkmate. Now let's dive into it. So when you're trying to do the king and queen checkmate, the major things that you're going to be looking at is trying to do a cage, right? Or let's just say the major thing is trying to firstly push the king to any edge of the board, right? Now there's two simple ways that you can do this, right? And it's very simple. So you can either choose to do this with the queen alone, but this is going to take a much more longer route, right? But it's still very easy. Now all you just need to do is to maintain a knight movement from the king, right? The first thing that you want to do is try to, as much as possible, maintain what? All you need to do is try to maintain as much as possible a knight movement away from the king, right? And if you go queen to f2, you can see this is a knight movement, right? This is a knight movement. Now, let's first of all picture the cage that we're trapping our opponent's king inside. I'm placing the queen on this f2 square, right? Blocks the placing the queen on this f2 square blocks the king from moving across the f file, like onto the g h file, and also stopping the king from moving downwards towards the second rank, right? Now let's say he decides to play it this way. You still do the same thing, maintain a knight's distance away from the king, the closest knight's distance as possible. Now what's the closest? If you look well, you're going to see that this is going to be the closest knight's distance away from the king, and you keep on doing this until you eventually get the king to the edge of the board, right? Now let's say he moves this way, you just move closer, maintaining a knight's distance. This is the first, and this is one of the major simplest ways that you can understand this and eventually just do the checkmate, right? This is not the fastest way to do a king and queen checkmate, right? So after this I'm going to show you how to do that. Now if the king moves towards this side, what is going to be the best move to play, right? Remember, still a knight's distance away from the king. And you can see there are two ways you can actually go about this. You can go with the queen to d3, or you can go with the queen to e4, right? You can go with the queen to d3, or you can go with the queen to e4. Now let's say you play queen to e4, right? If he decides to go here, still the same thing, maintain a knight's distance, right? If he decides to go here instead, right, what are you going to do? Still maintain a knight's distance, and this is what you're just going to be doing for like the first like 10 to 15 moves, and eventually you're going to get him to the edge of the board. But when he gets to the extreme edge, I repeat, right, this is where a lot of players mess it up, right? Because they eventually still meet the position. So you need to understand this. Right? When you get the king to the edge of the board, right, to the extreme edge, I call this the extreme edge, right? So this is the extreme edge, and if it's at the extreme edge, any of these squares, that's a1, h1, h8, or a8, right, any of these squares, don't place it on a knight's distance, because if you place it on a knight's distance, what are you going to see? This is going to be a stalemate, right? Same thing here. The king has no way to go, and even though you're up a queen, this is going to be considered as a draw, right? So this is absolutely what you want to try and avoid. Now what are you going to do in this position if your opponent eventually goes to the extreme edge? Now you can just decide to move one step forward and lock the king on the extreme edge of the board, right? Now he's on the 8. We can say he's on the 8th rank. You can either do you can either lock him on this 8th rank or on the a5, right? As long as he moves only on any of these lines, right? Okay, like for instance in this position, this is the only move he has. He can only move this way and this way, right? This is the only move that he can be doing for the rest of his life, and that's what you want, right? Now same thing, while you're in this position, you can also choose to do this, right? Playing this, you are completely locking him on the A file now instead of the 8th rank. Remember, when we played this move, right, we locked him on the 8th rank, right? But now we're playing this move instead, and okay, sorry, this move instead, right? And we're locking him now on the A file. Right, we're locking him down on the A file, and the only move he can do again for the rest of his life is just moving forward, backwards, and this is going to give you time to now do the next important step that you need to do the checkmate, right? So now let's get the position back to where it was. So let's say you played this move and you decided to lock it on this side of the board, right? What are you going to do? Now you're going to start moving up with your king, right? That is the only thing that you have to do from now. Just move the king up, right? Move the king up, he moves here. This is the only square he wants that he can move. All you need to do is to move the king right up in front of your opponent's king, right? So let's say you go here, he moves this way, you keep on going forward, he moves here, you go forward, he moves here, you go forward, he moves here, and then this. And then what happens? You do a checkmate in one. So all you need to do is to place the queen right in front of the king, right in front of the king, not by the side, right? If you go from here to here, it's a check, not a checkmate. So it has to be facing the king, not diagonal to the king. Remember, because a lot of my students do this, right? Not diagonal to the king, but just directly facing the king, right? And once you do this, this is going to be a checkmate. You can also do it by going this way, but this is different when it's when you have an opposition. So an opposition is basically when your kings are facing each other. But we're going to look at the opposition when we're dealing with the king and rook checkmate. So we're going to deal with the opposition when we're looking at the king and rook checkmate. So make sure you practice this and try to see that you fully understand this before moving on to the next one, which is going to be the king and the rook checkmate, right? So if the queen goes here, it's going to be a checkmate. Let's say the king was here. What do you think the checkmate is going to be now? Now you can actually still do a checkmate here because the king basically can't jump out of the board. That is going to be crazy. So in this position, you can still place it in front of the king. It's going to be a checkmate, right? And no matter what he does, it's just going to get checkmated, as you can see. Now let's take it back, and what happened if we had gone all the way here and he just keeps on moving back and front, right? We still move our king to the front of the king, right? This way. We don't try to go this way. A lot of my opponents try to go, a lot of my students also try to go this way, right? And then eventually do a stalemate. But if you're trapping him on this rank, your king is supposed to move towards this side of the board, right? So if he goes here, what are you going to do? Move the king up. He goes here, move the king to d3. He goes here, move the king to d4. He goes here, move the king to d5. He goes here, we move the king to d6, and he goes here. You can choose to do a mate in one, but you can also choose to do this. And after this, what happens? Place the queen directly in front of the king. Right, so this is going to be the checkmate with the king and queen. Now, before we end the video, I'm just going to ask some few questions that you should try and solve. Now, what happens if you have the king placed here and you have the queen over here? What is the move that you can play? Now, notice that the king is already at the edge of the board. What move can you play to lock the king at the edge of the board so you can start moving in with your king? Now, you're going to see that the move is going to be queen to g7, right? So if queen goes to g7, you can see that the king can move out. It's now stuck on the h file, and it just gives me time to move my king all the way in front of the king, and eventually I'm going to deliver a checkmate. So let's say he goes here, you just move here, he goes to h3, you go to e5, he goes to h4, you go to f4, and wherever he goes, you just place the queen in front, right? If it decides to go here, you just place the queen in front. Now, the reason it's very important that you practice this as much as possible is because, right, when you're practicing, you're also going to see different ways. You're going to come across different ways so you can do this on your own, right? You're going to discover new ways, right? But what I'm teaching you, right, is just basically the simplest ways that you can go about in doing the checkmate. Now, remember, we just looked at doing the checkmate by placing the queen in the 9th position away from the king, in a knight distance away from the king, right? So right from here, we say all we just need to do is to be moving something like this. As long as we're maintaining a knight, sorry, as long as we're, no, as long as we're maintaining a knight distance away from the king, then eventually, no, the king can't go here. Eventually, we're going to get the king trapped to the edge of the board. Now, what's the other way that we can do the king and the queen checkmate, right? So it's very simple. Whenever the king moves a step backwards, right, this way, either to c4, d4, or e4, you just want to move your king up, right? If he moves sideways, all you need to do is move your queen forward, and you're kind of creating a cage. This is a much more faster way to do it, right? And if he decides to go here, right, now remember, this is upwards. He's going upwards, not sideways. If he goes sideways, you move the king. If he goes sideways, you move the queen. If it goes upwards, you move your king. And now if you move your king this way, right, he can't go even sideways, so he has to move back up. If he moves up, then you go upwards again, and you can see you're already taking his king towards the edge of the board. If he moves sideways, what happens? You move your queen up, and that's just what you're going to do. That's just what you're going to be doing until you eventually get the king to the edge of the board. Now, what happens if he moves both sideways and upwards? Let's say he goes to the square b7, right? Now, it doesn't matter what you play. You can choose to move your king up, or you can even choose to move your queen. Anyone still works fine, but I'll prefer moving the king closer, right? And right from this position, you're going to see that any square he makes traps him at the edge of the board, right? So let's say he decides to go here. There's one move that locks him completely at the edge of the board. Okay, two moves actually. So you can just pause to try and find it, but the moves that traps him completely at the edge of the board is going to be queen either to b2 or queen to b8, right? So queen to b2 or b8 locks the king at the edge of the board. Now, what happens if he had gone to this square? There's two moves that traps him at the edge of the board again, right? It's going to be queen to e7 or queen to g7, and once you've played any of these moves, the king is completely at the edge of the board. So now let's say you decide to go here, right? He moves to this side. What happens? Place your queen in front of the king, and wherever he goes, you do a checkmate, right? Wherever he goes, you still do a checkmate. And this is how to do a checkmate with the king and the queen. Thank you.